Don't look into her eyes unless you want your last thought to be terror. The warning crackled through Obsidian Station's overhead speakers every night at exactly 9 p.m., right as docking Sector 12 shifted into artificial dusk. Most people ignored the announcement the same way they ignored the woman herself. Heads lowered, eyes turned away. Conversations died the moment her shadow crossed the steel corridors. Ethan Carter stepped off the freight elevator with grease still smeared across his knuckles and the stale smell of reactor coolant clinging to his dark work jacket. 12 hours repairing cargo thrusters had left his shoulders aching like rusted hinges, but the station never really slept. Somewhere above the endless maze of pipes and neon-lit walkways, another transport ship groaned against magnetic clamps while customs drones buzzed through the haze like metal insects. Obsidian Station was loud, crowded, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Ethan usually kept his head down like everybody else. That was the rule out here. Don't get involved. Don't ask questions. Don't look too long at things people fear. Then he saw her. She sat alone at the far end of the cantina beneath a flickering blue holosign that advertised synthetic whiskey no one trusted. The entire section around her was empty. 10 tables. Maybe more. Not because the station was full. Because nobody wanted to be near her. Ethan noticed the details first. 7 feet tall, maybe taller. Deep violet blue skin that almost looked metallic beneath the dim lighting. Long silver hair spilling over one shoulder like liquid moonlight. Gold eyes fixed silently on the dark window beside her where freighters drifted through the stars like dying lanterns. She looked less like a passenger and more like a statue someone had abandoned centuries ago. A pair of dock workers passed Ethan carrying supply crates. Both immediately lowered their heads when they noticed the woman. One of them muttered a prayer under his breath. The other whispered, "Void Queen," before hurrying away. Ethan frowned. He'd heard the rumors, same as everyone else. They said entire crews suffered panic attacks. After making eye contact with her. Said cameras malfunctioned around her. Said she belonged to a species erased during the border collapse wars. Most people treated her like a ghost wearing a woman's face. The station bartender noticed Ethan staring and nearly dropped a glass. "Don't," he warned quietly. "Trust me, mechanic. Just don't." Ethan looked back toward the woman. She hadn't moved. Hadn't touched the steaming drink in front of her. For a second, she looked impossibly tired. Not dangerous. Not cursed. Just alone. The cantina's overhead lights hummed softly while somewhere outside the hull, a cargo horn echoed through the station like distant thunder. Ethan exhaled slowly, picked up his coffee, and started walking toward her table. Every conversation in the room stopped. Boots froze against metal flooring. Even the bartender whispered, "Oh no." The woman sensed him before he spoke. Her golden eyes slowly lifted to meet his. The story said people screamed when that happened. Ethan didn't scream. Didn't freeze either. He just pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with a tired sigh. "Seat taken?" he asked. For the first time since entering the cantina, the alien woman blinked. It was small, barely noticeable, but something fragile cracked behind those terrifying eyes. Then, quietly enough that only Ethan could hear, she asked, "Why are you not afraid of me?" The question lingered between them like static trapped inside old wiring. Ethan leaned back slightly in the metal chair, the warm paper cup resting between his rough hands while the cantina remained frozen around them. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended to eat anymore. Every pair of eyes in the room stayed carefully lowered, like the entire station was afraid that one accidental glance might invite disaster. Ethan studied the woman across from him again. Up close, the stories felt wrong. Dangerous people usually filled rooms with noise. Fear. Ego. She carried none of that. Only exhaustion. Tiny silver markings shimmered faintly beneath the skin around her eyes, almost like cracks in frozen glass. "Maybe I am just tired," Ethan finally answered. "Long shifts make bad decisions feel reasonable." For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. The corner of her mouth moved slightly upward. Not a smile exactly. More like she had almost forgotten how. "You joke while sitting beside a creature your people fear," she said softly. Her voice carried an unusual calmness to it. Deep. Smooth. Like distant thunder rolling across water. Ethan shrugged. People on this station are scared of expired milk and customs paperwork. A short breath escaped her nose. It took Ethan a second to realize she had almost laughed. The bartender behind the counter looked horrified. Ethan ignored him. Outside the cantina window, massive cargo freighters drifted through the blackness beyond the station hull, their engine lights glowing blue against endless stars. Somewhere overhead, docking clamps hissed as another transport locked into place. Obsidian Station never truly went quiet. Machines breathed constantly here. Steel groaned. Neon signs buzzed. Air recyclers whispered through vents carrying the smell of engine grease, burnt coffee, and recycled oxygen. The woman lowered her eyes toward the untouched drink sitting before her. Most humans avoid this corridor entirely when I arrive, she admitted. Some leave the station. Ethan glanced around the room. Looks like your reputation is expensive for local businesses. Her golden eyes flickered toward him again, sharper this time. Curious. You truly do not know who I am. Should I? Silence. Not hostile silence. Heavy silence. The kind filled with old memories. She slowly lifted one elegant hand and wrapped her fingers around the warm cup near her. Ethan noticed faint trembling in her movements, almost invisible beneath her composed posture. They call me Veilira now, she said quietly. But that was not always my name. The moment the words left her mouth, several people near the cantina exit hurried away. One dropped his tray so fast it clattered across the floor. Ethan watched them leave, confused. Okay, he muttered. That reaction feels dramatic. Veilira looked toward the dark window again. It is safer for them to fear me. Ethan frowned. You keep saying things like that. Because it is true. Her voice lowered further. Every person who tried getting close to me eventually regretted it. Ethan rubbed tired fingers across his jaw. You know, where I grew up in Ohio, my mother used to say people only become monsters after being treated like monsters long enough. Veilira turned toward him fully then. Really looked at him. The station lights reflected inside her gold eyes like distant suns. Ethan felt it immediately. Not fear. Pressure. Sadness, so deep it almost felt physical. Like standing beside an airlock window while watching a ship disappear forever into dark space. Your mother sounds wise, she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. She mostly yelled at baseball games and burned pancakes. Another almost laugh escaped her before her expression suddenly changed. Subtle. Instant. Her gaze shifted toward the cantina entrance. Ethan followed it and saw 3 armored station security officers entering through the sliding doors. The room became even quieter somehow. One of the officers pointed directly toward their table. Then the lead officer spoke into his wrist. Confirmed sighting, he said coldly. The Void Queen is not alone anymore. The 3 security officers moved through the cantina slowly, their dark armor reflecting strips of blue neon light across the scratched metal floor. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed too loudly. Obsidian Station had thousands of passengers crossing its sectors every day, but fear traveled faster than any ship ever built. Ethan could feel it spreading through the room now, like cold air leaking from a damaged airlock. The lead officer stopped beside their table and looked directly at Veilira without fully meeting her eyes. Even armed men avoided that. You were instructed to remain inside your assigned sector, he said flatly. Veilira did not react. Her hands remained folded around the untouched cup of coffee, long silver fingers steady against the rising steam. I required food, she answered quietly. Delivery drones exist for that purpose. Ethan glanced between them. Seriously, he muttered. You guys policing cafeteria visits now? The officer finally turned toward Ethan. His expression shifted immediately from controlled authority to visible confusion. You have been sitting here with her this entire time? Last time I checked. The officer stared harder, almost searching Ethan's face for signs of panic. Sweat. Trembling. Anything. When he found none, his voice lowered slightly. Sir, for your own safety, I strongly advise you to step away from the table. Ethan leaned back in his chair. And if I do not? The cantina lights buzzed overhead while somewhere deep in the station, a freight engine rumbled through the walls like distant thunder. Veilira remained motionless beside him. The officer hesitated before answering. Then station protocol requires us to escort you both for evaluation. Ethan let out a tired breath through his nose. Of course it does. He looked sideways at Veilira. You always attract this much attention? Her eyes stayed fixed ahead. This is considered a calm evening. One of the officers behind the leader shifted nervously. Ethan noticed the man gripping a small silver device attached to his belt. Not a weapon, a neural stabilizer. The realization made Ethan frown. These people genuinely believed being near her could damage the mind. The lead officer activated a holographic scanner above his wrist. A soft blue light passed briefly across Ethan's face. Pulse elevated, the officer noted. Minor adrenaline increase. Ethan blinked. You scanned me because I drank bad station coffee and got interrupted during dinner. Human neurological responses are difficult to predict. That might be the dumbest thing anybody has said to me this week. To Ethan's surprise, Veilira lowered her head slightly, hiding what looked suspiciously like amusement. The officer noticed it too. His expression tightened immediately. This interaction is inappropriate. Ethan rubbed his temples. What interaction? The officer's jaw clenched. Emotional bonding. The silence that followed nearly broke Ethan. He stared at the man for 2 full seconds before laughing under his breath. Not loudly, just enough to crack the suffocating tension in the room. Buddy, Ethan said, I repair cooling systems for a living. The closest thing I've got to. Emotional bonding is yelling at broken machinery. Something changed in Veilira then. Small, fragile, but real. Ethan saw the tension in her shoulders loosen for the first time since he sat down. It was almost impossible to imagine someone feared across entire sectors simply because she looked exhausted and lonely. The lead officer powered down his scanner with obvious frustration. You are making this situation more difficult than necessary. No, Ethan replied calmly. I think everybody else already did that long before I showed up. Veilira slowly turned toward him again. Her golden eyes reflected the station lights with that same strange sadness Ethan had noticed earlier. But now there was something else there too. Curiosity. Careful. Uncertain. Human. Then the officer's comm device crackled sharply with static. A distorted voice echoed through the cantina. Attention all units. Unauthorized hunters have entered docking sector 12. Repeat. Bounty operatives are searching for the target known as Veilira. The entire room froze again. Ethan looked at Veilira. For the first time all night, real fear crossed her face. The fear on Veilira's face vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. She stood smoothly from the table, silver hair catching the pale neon glow above them, while the entire cantina instinctively pulled farther away. Ethan noticed it immediately. People were not only afraid of her, they were afraid of whoever was coming for her. The lead security officer touched his wrist comm again, tension tightening across his jaw. All station personnel are ordered to avoid docking sector 12 until containment teams arrive. Ethan grabbed the last sip of his coffee before standing beside Veilira. Containment, he repeated. That is a comforting word. Veilira looked toward the exit. You should leave now, Ethan Carter. Hearing his full name in her calm voice felt strangely personal. Ethan frowned. How do you know my last name? Your station badge reflects in windows. He glanced down at his worn mechanic jacket. Right. Detective skills. Despite everything, that almost smile returned briefly to her face. Then it disappeared beneath something colder. Older. The people searching for me are not station security, she said quietly. They will not care who stands nearby. One of the officers shifted uneasily. She is correct. Ethan stared at him. You guys are suddenly taking her side? We are taking survival seriously. The overhead speakers crackled alive again. Emergency advisory. Unauthorized vessels detected approaching maintenance docks. Civilian movement is restricted. Somewhere beyond the cantina walls, warning sirens began pulsing through the station in slow intervals. Red emergency lights flashed briefly across the ceiling before fading back to blue. The atmosphere changed instantly. Obsidian Station always felt cold, but now it felt haunted. Ethan watched passengers rush through the corridor outside the cantina windows carrying bags and data cases against their chests. Nobody looked toward Veilira as they passed. Nobody wanted to acknowledge her existence. Like pretending she was invisible might somehow protect them. Ethan hated that feeling more than he expected. Veilira reached for the dark hooded cloak draped over her chair and pulled it around her shoulders with practiced efficiency. I will leave through maintenance corridors, she said. The hunters prefer crowded sectors. They enjoy witnesses. Ethan noticed the smallest tremor in her fingers while fastening the cloak. Fear again, carefully hidden beneath years of discipline. You sound like you know them personally, he said. Her silence answered before her voice did. I do. The security officers exchanged uncertain looks. None of them stepped closer. None of them offered help either. Ethan looked around the room at all the lowered heads and nervous faces pretending not to listen. Something about it irritated him deeply. Maybe because he recognized the expression. He had seen it years ago after his father lost everything back on Earth. People avoiding eye contact, crossing streets, acting like pain could spread through proximity. This place really knows how to abandon people, Ethan muttered. Veilira heard him. It is easier for them this way. Maybe for them. Her golden eyes met his again. Softer now. You should not continue. Following me. Ethan shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. Funny thing is, I do not remember agreeing to follow you in the first place. Another distant siren echoed through the station. Closer this time. Heavy footsteps thundered somewhere above the cantina's ceiling as security teams moved through upper sectors. Ethan could feel vibrations humming through the steel floor beneath his boots. Veilira stepped toward the exit. The crowd immediately parted before her without a word. Fear opened a path faster than authority ever could. She paused once reaching the doorway and looked back at Ethan over her shoulder. Most humans cannot remain near me for longer than 20 minutes, she said quietly. You have stayed nearly an hour. Ethan shrugged tiredly. I grew up with 3 younger sisters. Psychological damage stopped scaring me years ago. To his surprise, a soft sound escaped her. A real laugh this time. Small, warm, human. It lasted barely 2 seconds before the station lights suddenly dimmed across the entire corridor. Every screen inside the cantina flickered violently with static. Then a new voice echoed from the overhead system. Deep, mechanical, calm. Attention passengers. The bounty for the woman known as Veilira has increased to 50 million credits. Silence swallowed the room. Ethan slowly looked toward her. For the first time all night, she looked completely alone. The announcement echoed through Obsidian Station long after the speakers went silent. 50 million credits. Ethan watched the number hit the room harder than any alarm had. People who had been avoiding Veilira moments earlier were now quietly studying exits, calculating distances, weighing greed against fear. It made Ethan's stomach turn. Veilira seemed to notice it too. She pulled the dark cloak tighter around herself and lowered her eyes toward the floor. Now you understand, she said softly. Nobody sees a person anymore. Ethan glanced around the cantina. A merchant near the back slowly activated a private comm device beneath the table. Another passenger subtly snapped a photo before quickly looking away. The atmosphere felt poisonous now. Heavy. Hungry. Ethan had worked on cargo stations most of his adult life, and he knew exactly what desperation looked like. 50 million credits could buy new identities, ships, colonies, entire futures. You should go, Ethan said quietly. Veilira nodded once. I already told you that. No, I mean now. He motioned toward the room. Before somebody decides retirement sounds more important than morality. Her expression barely changed, but Ethan noticed the sadness return to her eyes. Not surprise. Familiarity. Like betrayal had become something expected long ago. She turned toward the corridor leading deeper into docking sector 12. Ethan watched people immediately step aside from her path. Nobody wanted to brush against her cloak. Nobody wanted to risk contact. The station lights flickered overhead again, briefly bathing the corridor in crimson emergency glow before returning to blue. Somewhere nearby, heavy transport engines vibrated through the walls. Ethan looked toward the bartender and tossed a few credits onto the counter for the untouched coffee. Keep the change, he muttered. The bartender stared at him like he had lost his mind. You are seriously leaving with her? Ethan shrugged into his worn jacket. Somebody probably should. Human, the bartender whispered urgently. You do not understand what she is. Ethan paused beside the doorway. Neither do any of you. Then he stepped into the corridor after her. The station air felt colder outside the cantina. Giant ventilation fans hummed above endless rows of exposed pipes, while freight drones rolled past carrying metal containers stacked 8 feet high. Neon advertisements flickered across damp steel walls in alien languages Ethan could not read. Veilira walked ahead of him silently, moving with an elegance that somehow made the crowded industrial station feel smaller around her. Ethan noticed people retreating into nearby stores the moment they recognized her. One mother gently covered her child's eyes as they passed. Veilira pretended not to notice. That hurt more than if she had reacted. So, Ethan said after a minute, trying to cut through the suffocating silence. Is 50 million your normal rate? Or are you having a special promotion tonight? To his surprise, her shoulders shifted slightly. Another hidden laugh. You cope with fear through humor. I cope with everything through humor. Childhood survival mechanism. Veolyra slowed near a maintenance junction where steam drifted from ceiling vents in soft white clouds. The artificial light caught tiny silver patterns beneath her skin again, making them shimmer faintly. You should not continue walking beside me, she said without looking at him. Eventually someone will try collecting the bounty. Ethan shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. That happens every time rent is due around here. She finally stopped walking and turned toward him fully. The station noise faded strangely in that moment. Ethan could hear distant reactor pulses somewhere deep below the sector floor. Could smell machine oil and overheated wiring drifting through the corridor air. Veolyra studied his face carefully, almost like she was trying to solve something impossible. Why? She asked quietly. Why what? Why do you continue choosing kindness after learning what I am worth? Ethan frowned slightly at the question. Then he looked down the long, empty corridor where frightened strangers kept pretending she did not exist. Because, he answered slowly, the first thing everybody told me about you was how dangerous your eyes were. He met her gaze again, but nobody ever mentioned how sad they looked. Veolyra went completely still. Somewhere behind them, a distant metallic door suddenly slammed open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Multiple voices. Getting closer. The footsteps grew louder against the steel corridor floor, steady and deliberate. Not station security this time. Ethan could tell immediately. Security officers on Obsidian Station moved nervously, always rushing, always reacting. Whoever approached now walked with confidence, like they already owned the outcome. Veolyra's expression hardened the instant she heard them. The softness that had briefly appeared in her eyes vanished behind years of practiced control. Do not speak unless necessary, she said quietly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That advice feels personally targeted. She ignored the comment and stepped closer to the maintenance junction wall where shadows from exposed pipes cut across her cloak. Ethan noticed the subtle shift in her breathing. Calm on the surface, tense underneath. The corridor lights dimmed again as emergency power rerouted through nearby sectors. Steam drifted lazily from ceiling vents, wrapping the hallway in pale white fog, while warning sirens echoed somewhere far below the station. Then they appeared. Four figures in matte black armor emerged from the opposite end of the corridor, their boots clicking softly against the metal floor. No insignias, no station markings. The tallest among them wore a silver visor that reflected the corridor lights like broken glass. Ethan immediately disliked him. Veolyra, the man called calmly. You continue making simple things unnecessarily complicated. Ethan glanced sideways. Friends of yours? No, her answer came instantly. That is unfortunate, the armored man replied while slowing to a stop about 20 feet away. We traveled a very long distance for this meeting. Ethan noticed people nearby disappearing behind sealed shop doors the moment the strangers arrived. Entire sections of the corridor suddenly emptied. Even the maintenance drones rerouted themselves elsewhere. Fear again, but different this time. Colder. Professional. The leader's visor shifted slightly toward Ethan. Human civilian, he said. You may leave. Ethan crossed his arms. That usually sounds less suspicious when said by people not dressed like comic book villains. One of the armored figures behind the leader moved subtly, almost impatiently. Veolyra stepped half a pace forward before anything escalated. He is not involved. Ethan looked at her. I feel involved. You should not be. The leader tilted his head slightly while studying Ethan. Interesting. His voice remained perfectly calm. Most species cannot tolerate prolonged proximity to her. Yet your cognitive responses appear stable. Ethan sighed softly. Everybody keeps saying that like I am supposed to explode. You do not understand what she is carrying. The corridor seemed quieter after those words. Even the station hum felt distant somehow. Veolyra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly beneath the shadow of her hood. Ethan noticed it immediately. Whatever these people wanted, it went deeper than money. The leader took another slow step forward. We are authorized to escort her peacefully. Ethan glanced around the nearly abandoned corridor. And I am authorized to not believe that sentence. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, the armored man laughed once under his breath. Humans truly are strange creatures. Veilira suddenly turned toward Ethan, her voice lower now. Urgent. Please leave. Ethan frowned. It was the first time she had sounded genuinely worried for him instead of herself. You keep asking that, he said quietly. And you keep refusing. Her golden eyes met his again. The station lights reflected inside them like distant stars trapped beneath water. Ethan saw it clearly now. She was not afraid of being captured. She was afraid somebody else would suffer because of her. The realization settled heavily in his chest. The leader's visor angled toward the far end of the corridor as new station alarms suddenly pulsed overhead. Security teams are approaching, he said calmly. This station is becoming inconvenient. Ethan rubbed tired fingers across the back of his neck. You know, this night was supposed to end with cheap noodles and 8 hours of sleep. Veilira stared at him for a second longer than expected. Then something impossible happened. Her hand slowly reached for his wrist. Warm despite the cold station air. Gentle. Ethan, she whispered softly. Nobody has stood beside me in a very long time. The words hit harder than the alarms. Before Ethan could answer, every light in the corridor suddenly shut off at once. Total darkness swallowed the station. Then a deep mechanical voice echoed from somewhere above them. Lockdown initiated. Target confirmed. Darkness swallowed the corridor so completely that Ethan could hear people breathing somewhere behind sealed shop doors. The constant neon glow of Obsidian Station vanished, replaced by the deep mechanical hum of emergency systems struggling to reroute power. For one strange second, the entire sector felt suspended in empty space. Then thin red emergency lights flickered alive along the floor panels, casting the corridor in dim crimson shadows. Ethan instinctively turned toward Veilira. Her hand still rested lightly around his wrist. Warm. Steady. The armored figures across the corridor had not moved. Their silver visors glowed faintly in the dark like distant stars. Lockdown protocols confirmed. The mechanical voice announced overhead. All civilian sectors sealed. Ethan let out a slow breath. Fantastic. Nothing says relaxing evening like involuntary imprisonment. One of the armored hunters stepped forward slightly. This does not concern you, human. Ethan glanced toward him. Funny. It keeps concerning me anyway. Veilira slowly released Ethan's wrist, though her fingers lingered for half a second longer than necessary. You should not continue this, she whispered. These people do not stop. Ethan looked around the corridor again. Every exit door had sealed shut with heavy magnetic locks. Steam drifted low across the floor from nearby vents while red warning lights reflected against polished steel walls. Somewhere deep beneath the station, reactor turbines pulsed like a giant artificial heartbeat. Good news, Ethan muttered quietly. Looks like leaving is no longer an option. The lead hunter tilted his head slightly. You are remarkably calm for someone trapped beside the most feared woman in 3 sectors. Ethan shrugged. Honestly, she has been the least threatening person I met tonight. Veilira looked at him sharply after that. Not annoyed. Confused. Like kindness still surprised her every time it appeared. The lead hunter took another measured step closer. Do you know why there is a bounty on her? Ethan folded his arms. I assume she forgot to return a library book. No response this time. Just silence. Heavy silence. Veilira lowered her gaze toward the floor, and Ethan noticed the tension returning beneath her calm expression. The hunter's voice softened slightly. Entire governments collapsed searching for what remains inside her mind. Ethan blinked once. That sounds dramatically unhealthy. Her species possessed abilities no civilization could replicate. The hunter's visor reflected the dim red lights as he continued. Empathic synchronization. Memory transfer. Emotional resonance powerful enough to influence entire populations. Ethan slowly turned toward Veilira. She said nothing, which somehow confirmed everything. People feared us long before they hunted us, she admitted quietly. Fear simply became easier once there were fewer of us left. The words settled coldly in Ethan's chest. He remembered the way passengers avoided her. The mother covering her child's eyes. The bartender whispering warnings like prayers. None of them had ever asked who she was before deciding what she deserved. Ethan knew that feeling too well. Smaller scale. Different world. Same loneliness. A sudden metallic impact echoed somewhere deeper in the sector. Another door breaching open. The hunters stiffened slightly at the sound. Additional teams have arrived, one of them warned. The lead hunter cursed softly under his breath for the first time. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I thought you people were the additional team. We were hired to retrieve her quietly, the hunter replied. Others were hired to retrieve her publicly. Veolira's expression darkened instantly. Real concern crossed her face again. Then there is no time left. Ethan frowned. Time for what? She looked directly at him, gold eyes glowing faintly beneath the emergency lights. To keep you out of this. Before Ethan could answer, the corridor trembled violently beneath their feet. Dust drifted from ceiling panels overhead, while warning sirens erupted through the station louder than before. Then every holographic screen along the corridor suddenly activated at once. A single image appeared across all of them. Veolira's face. Beneath it, glowing white letters spread across the screens like a death sentence. Last surviving heir of the Ithrani throne. The glowing words stretched across every screen in the corridor, while warning sirens pulsed through the station like a dying heartbeat. Last surviving heir of the Ithrani throne. Ethan stared at the image of Veolira frozen beneath the harsh white text. For a second, the station itself seemed to go silent around him. No jokes came to mind this time. No sarcastic response. Only the realization that the woman everyone treated like a curse had once belonged to something far bigger than fear. Veolira stood perfectly still beneath the flickering emergency lights, her hood partially shadowing her face, while the holographic screens reflected gold across her eyes. The armored hunters nearby lowered their heads slightly. Not out of fear. Respect. Ethan noticed immediately. Queen, one of them said quietly. Veolira closed her eyes for half a second, as though the word itself exhausted her. Do not call me that. Ethan looked between them slowly. Okay, he muttered. I officially have several questions now. Another tremor rolled through the corridor floor, stronger this time. Dust drifted from exposed ceiling pipes while somewhere in the distance, heavy magnetic doors slammed shut sector by sector. Obsidian Station was sealing itself alive. The lead hunter stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, the retrieval teams are no longer operating under contract authority. Multiple governments intercepted the transmission. Veolira's expression darkened. Then they know. Everyone knows now. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face. I cannot believe my shift ended 3 hours ago. Veolira turned toward him slowly. The sadness in her eyes looked deeper now somehow. Older. The Ithrani were not destroyed because we were dangerous, she said quietly. We were destroyed because other civilizations feared what we could become. Ethan listened carefully while red emergency lights painted shifting shadows across the corridor walls. And what could you become? He asked softly. Her gaze drifted toward the holographic screens displaying her face. Connected. The single word lingered heavily between them. The lead hunter spoke again before Ethan could respond. The Ithrani could feel emotional frequencies across entire populations. Empathy, grief, fear, hope. He paused briefly. Your species spent centuries trying to weaponize division. There's evolved beyond it. Ethan looked back at Veolira. Suddenly the loneliness surrounding her made horrifying sense. A species, capable of feeling others so deeply would suffer terribly in a galaxy built on fear. That is why people panic around you. Ethan asked quietly. Veolira nodded once. Most minds resist emotional resonance. Prolonged exposure overwhelms them. But not me. Her eyes lifted toward his. No, Ethan frowned slightly. Why? Silence followed again. Not uncomfortable this time. Careful. Veolira studied him with an expression Ethan still struggled to understand. Wonder mixed with caution. I do not know, she admitted softly. You look at me without resisting. Ethan blinked once. Pretty sure that sounded more romantic than scientific. To his surprise, the faintest trace of warmth touched her expression again. Then the corridor lights suddenly flickered violently. Every holographic screen shattered into static at once. The hunters immediately stiffened. They are here, one of them warned. Ethan heard it a second later. Slow footsteps echoing from the far end of the sector beyond the sealed blast doors. Heavy, calm, deliberate. Whoever approached was not rushing, which somehow felt worse. Veolira stepped closer to Ethan instinctively before stopping herself. Listen to me carefully, she whispered. When those doors open, You must leave my side. Ethan folded his arms. You really do not know humans very well yet. Ethan. No. Seriously. He looked directly into her glowing gold eyes, while reactor sirens screamed around them. Everybody on this station keeps acting like kindness is some kind of disease. The blast doors at the far end of the corridor groaned loudly as massive locking mechanisms began disengaging one by one. Ethan did not look away from her. Maybe your species was not the dangerous one after all. Veolyra stared at him in complete silence. Then, for the first time since meeting her, Ethan saw tears gathering slowly in the corners of her eyes. The massive blast doors slid apart with a deep metallic groan that echoed through the corridor like the opening of a tomb. Cold air swept inward, carrying the scent of ozone and engine smoke from the docking sectors beyond. Every emergency light along the walls flickered violently as silhouettes emerged through. The drifting steam. Not soldiers. Not bounty hunters. Representatives. Ethan recognized the difference immediately. Expensive dark uniforms. Gold insignias. Calm faces practiced in the art of pretending morality still mattered after politics got involved. At their center walked an elderly woman with silver mechanical implants lining the side of her neck. She stopped the moment she saw Veolyra standing beneath the crimson station lights. Then, slowly, she lowered her head. Every person behind her did the same. The corridor fell silent except for distant reactor hums vibrating beneath the floor. Ethan glanced sideways at Veolyra. The tears in her eyes had not fallen yet, but her expression looked dangerously close to breaking. Your Majesty, the older woman said softly. For 20 years we believed your bloodline extinct. Veolyra's voice remained quiet. Most days I wished it was. Nobody answered immediately. Even the hunters stepped aside now, no longer acting like captors. Ethan noticed something strange then. Fear was gone from the corridor, replaced by guilt. The older woman lifted her gaze carefully. The Coalition Senate requests your return under diplomatic protection. Ethan let out a small breath through his nose. Funny how quickly people become respectful once titles appear. Veolyra looked toward him after that, and Ethan saw something shifting behind her eyes again. Not loneliness this time. Conflict. You do not understand, she whispered softly. If I return, they will use me. Maybe, Ethan admitted. But hiding forever does not exactly sound healthy either. The older representative stepped forward carefully. The galaxy is changing, Your Majesty. Old fears are losing power. Ethan looked around the damaged corridor with its flashing alarms, frightened civilians hiding behind sealed doors, and bounty hunters waiting for orders. You might be overselling that a little. A faint smile touched the old woman's face before fading again. Veolyra remained motionless beneath the red emergency lights, while station sirens slowly quieted overhead. Ethan could almost feel the weight pressing against her shoulders. Entire civilizations waiting for one exhausted woman to decide whether they deserved another chance. That kind of responsibility would crush most people. Then Veolyra turned fully toward Ethan. Everything else in the corridor seemed to disappear for a second. The noise, the lights, the frightened strangers. Just those impossible gold eyes holding his. In my species, she said quietly, bonding is not chosen through ceremony. Ethan blinked once. Okay, that sentence feels important. Another tiny, almost smile appeared through her sadness. The Thrani form attachments through emotional resonance. We remain near the minds that bring us peace. Ethan stared at her silently while the station hummed around them. Suddenly, every moment from the evening rearranged itself inside his head. The way she stayed near him. The way her breathing steadied around him. The way she looked less alone every time he refused to walk away. Veolyra stepped closer until only inches separated them. For the first time in many years, she whispered, my mind became quiet beside yours. Ethan forgot every joke he almost made after that. Slowly, carefully, Veolyra lifted one hand and rested it lightly against his cheek. Warm skin, trembling fingers, human enough to break his heart. Around them, nobody spoke. Even the station itself seemed to hold its breath. Ethan covered her hand gently with his own. You know, he said softly, back on Earth this usually counts as a pretty good first date. A soft laugh escaped her through tears she no longer tried hiding. Real laughter. Alive. The old representative quietly motioned for everyone else to leave the corridor. One by one, they obeyed without protest. No threats. No chains. No commands. Just silence. Respectful silence. Eventually, only Ethan and Veolara remained beneath the fading emergency lights, while freighters drifted beyond the station windows like distant stars crossing dark water. Veolara looked toward space for a long moment before speaking again. I spent years believing the galaxy feared my eyes, she whispered. Then she looked back at Ethan. But you saw me instead.